She saved a wounded Comanche from a posse. The next day, his warriors surrounded her house and the sun was already high in the sky when she stepped out of the small wooden cabin that she called home. The morning had started quietly, with only the soft sounds of the wind through the tall prairie grass and the occasional call of a distant bird. Her life on the ranch was lonely, but she had grown used to it. The ranch had been in her family for years, and after losing her parents to illness, she had stayed behind, determined to keep it alive. Every day was full of work, feeding the animals, checking the fences, tending the small garden behind her house. But it was a life she chose, and she liked the peace it gave her. That morning, she carried a bucket of water toward the fields where the cattle grazed. The air smelled of dry earth and fresh grass, and the warmth of the sun touched her face. As she moved along the fence line, she noticed something unusual near the creek that ran through the back of her property. The water sparkled under the sunlight, but the bushes nearby seemed disturbed, as if something had moved through them recently. She paused, tilting her head to listen. At first, there was nothing but the gentle rustling of the leaves. Then she heard a faint sound, a groan, almost like someone in pain. Her heart skipped a beat. It was unusual to hear anyone near her ranch, and the thought that someone might be hurt made her hesitate. She knew the land was dangerous. Out here, help was far away, and trouble could find anyone who wandered alone. Yet something inside her urged her forward. She moved carefully toward the creek, keeping her eyes on the bushes. There, half hidden by branches, lay a man. His clothes were torn, stained with dirt and blood, and he was shivering. His face was pale, and he looked as though he had not eaten in days. At first, he tried to crawl away when he saw her, but his strength failed him, and he fell back onto the ground. She froze for a moment. He was clearly hurt, and she realized he had probably been running from someone or something. In the distance, she thought she saw dust rising along the road, but she could not be sure. It was risky. Helping him could bring danger right to her door. But she could not leave him there to die. Her hands shook as she set down the bucket of water and approached him. "Hey," she said softly, keeping her voice calm. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The man looked at her with wary eyes. His gaze was sharp and guarded, but there was pain behind it that softened his expression. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out. She knelt beside him, examining his injuries. His arm was badly cut, and there were bruises across his face. He had likely been running for hours, maybe even days, and his body was weak from exhaustion. She lifted him carefully, trying not to worsen his injuries. It was not easy. He was heavy, and she was alone, but she managed to drag him through the grass toward the cabin. Once inside, she laid him gently on a clean blanket. She quickly fetched water and a cloth to clean the worst of the blood. As she worked, he closed his eyes, trusting her despite the danger surrounding them. For hours she tended to him. She tore strips of cloth to wrap his wounds and brewed some tea from herbs she had dried in the kitchen. He drank slowly, wincing, but eventually settled into a quiet stillness. She could see the gratitude in his eyes, though he did not speak much. They both knew that words were not as important as survival right now. As the day passed, she learned small pieces of his story. His name was Running Hawk, and he belonged to a Comanche band that had been traveling across the region. They had been pursued by a posse after a conflict with settlers, and in the chaos he had been injured and separated from the others. His voice was soft, and his broken English was mixed with his native language, but she could understand enough to know that he had survived by sheer will. She listened with a quiet intensity, feeling the weight of his experience. She had heard stories of violence between settlers and Native Americans, but hearing it from someone who had lived through it made it real in a way books and newspapers never could. She realized that he was not the enemy. He was simply a man trying to survive, like her, in a harsh and unforgiving world.
Even as she cared for him, fear lingered in her mind.
What if the posse came looking for him? What if neighbors or travelers discovered that she was hiding a wounded man? She knew that helping him was dangerous, but she could not bring herself to turn him away. Her heart told her that saving a life was worth any risk. By evening, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cabin. She brought him some bread and more water, and for the first time he managed a small smile. It was a fragile moment of trust, but it strengthened her resolve. She could see that he needed more than just physical care. He needed someone to believe in him even when the world had turned against him. That night, she stayed awake longer than usual, keeping a careful watch over him. She listened for sounds outside, every creak of the cabin, every rustle in the trees, but nothing came. The night was quiet, and for a few hours she allowed herself to hope that they might both be safe. She thought about the world beyond the ranch, about the rules that men and governments had set, but she also thought about human kindness. In that quiet darkness, she realized that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest. As she drifted into a light sleep, she felt the man's weak hand brush hers in thanks. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. They were strangers from different worlds, yet in that moment they were connected by the most basic human truth: the need to care for one another. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew that she had made a choice, and she would stand by it no matter the danger. The first part of this story ends with the rancher and the wounded man in the quiet cabin, a fragile peace settling over them. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, beautiful and dangerous at the same time. Inside, two lives had crossed paths and a bond was beginning to form, one that would be tested in ways she could never imagine. The next morning, the ranch felt different. The sunlight spilled over the fields, but there was an edge of tension in the air that had not been there before. The young rancher rose early, preparing breakfast as she kept one eye on the wounded man. He was still weak, but he had slept better than the previous night. His breathing was steady, and the bruises and cuts were slowly beginning to heal. She moved quietly, not wanting to startle him, but her mind was already racing with worries about the day ahead. Rumors traveled fast in a small frontier town nearby, and she knew it would not be long before someone noticed a stranger had been on her property. The thought made her uneasy. She glanced out the window, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement along the dirt road. Dust clouds in the distance could mean travelers, neighbors, or the posse that had been chasing him. She had no way of knowing, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. Despite the fear, she did not allow herself to panic. She focused on the tasks she could control. She gathered more water from the well, checked the fences around the ranch, and made sure that the small herd of cattle was safe. She worked quickly but carefully, mindful that every noise could carry across the open fields. After that, she returned to the cabin to check on the wounded man.
"Good morning," she said softly. He stirred, his eyes opening slowly.
A weak smile appeared on his face, and he gave a small nod. "Morning," he whispered. His voice was still hoarse, but stronger than the day before. She handed him a cup of water and some bread. "You need to eat slowly. Your body is still weak." He nodded again and took small bites, his eyes occasionally meeting hers with a look that mixed gratitude and caution. He was learning to trust her, but he had lived in a world where trust could be dangerous. She understood that. As he ate, she asked carefully, "Do you remember anything about how you got hurt?" He shook his head slightly, then pointed to his arm. "Running!" "Too fast. Fell." They chased. His words were broken, but the meaning was clear. He had been running from men who wanted to capture him, and in his desperation, he had injured himself. She nodded, understanding the gravity of his situation. "You were lucky I found you," she said. "You could have been lost out there." He did not respond, but she could see in his eyes that he understood. There was a long pause, filled only by the quiet sounds of the cabin, the wind brushing against the wooden walls, the soft breathing of the animals outside, and the gentle trickle of the creek nearby. For the rest of the morning, she focused on helping him recover. She cleaned the small cuts and bruises, prepared more food, and made sure he stayed hydrated. He watched her, sometimes helping with small tasks he could manage, like fetching a cloth or stirring the pot. They were slowly learning to work together, finding a rhythm that brought a sense of normalcy despite the dangers surrounding them. By noon, she decided they needed to be ready for any visitors. She reinforced the doors and windows, placing heavy furniture against the weakest points. She stored tools and small weapons in easy-to-reach places, not because she wanted to fight, but because she needed to be prepared. The thought that the posse might come searching for him weighed heavily on her mind. She could not imagine what would happen if they found him here. At the same time, she was curious about his life before he arrived at her ranch. She wanted to know more about the world he came from, the people he cared about, and the struggles he had faced. She asked him questions gently, allowing him to answer only what he felt safe sharing. He spoke slowly, describing his family and the tribe he belonged to, the open plains and the traditions they followed. She listened with genuine interest, fascinated by a culture so different from her own yet filled with values she recognized: loyalty, courage, and a strong connection to the land. He began to share small stories of his travels, of hunting and gathering with his band, and of the moments of peace and joy they had found despite the constant threat of danger. Listening to him, she realized that he was not simply a victim of violence. He was a person with a history, dreams, and relationships. This realization deepened her empathy and made her determination to help him even stronger. Yet fear never fully left her mind. She knew the townspeople were talking. She had overheard whispers from neighbors who had passed her ranch the day before. Some spoke of her bravery, but others questioned her judgment. She understood why. Out here, helping someone considered an enemy was dangerous even if morally right. But she refused to let fear control her actions. She would not abandon him, no matter what the world thought. As the afternoon passed, the rancher and the wounded man shared quiet moments. She taught him small skills he could manage despite his injuries, like tending to the small garden or feeding the chickens. He began to move more confidently, leaning less on her for support. She watched him recover with a mixture of relief and admiration. It was remarkable how quickly he adapted, even after enduring such pain. During one quiet moment, he pointed to the horizon and spoke a few words she did not understand. She asked him what he meant, and he smiled faintly. "They, my people! They will come!" he said. His tone was calm, but there was an underlying warning. She understood immediately. The Comanche warriors who belonged to his band would likely come looking for him. It was not a threat, but a reality she needed to face. Her mind raced with questions. Would they be angry?
Would they see her as a friend or a foe? She knew little about how they would react to an outsider who had helped one of their own.
She could only hope that her actions, the care she had given him, would speak louder than words. The hours passed slowly, filled with small tasks and quiet conversations. She tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, even as the weight of what was to come pressed on her. She repaired fences, tended animals, and prepared more food. She kept glancing at the distant horizon, imagining the moment when strangers might appear. Every sound made her heart beat faster. The call of a bird, the rustle of the grass, the creak of the cabin door. By evening, the wounded man was sitting up, eating a simple meal she had prepared. He looked healthier than he had the day before, and she could see the faint color returning to his face. For the first time, he spoke without hesitation. "Thank you," he said simply. She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest she had not known before. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "I did what anyone would do." He shook his head slightly. "Not anyone," he said. "You brave." She did not argue. Instead, she let the words settle between them, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming in this small cabin. It was fragile, but it was real. A connection built on trust, kindness, and the courage to do what was right. As night fell, she prepared for the possibility that the next day would bring strangers to her door. She secured the cabin as best she could, and for the first time she allowed herself a moment to reflect on the strange twist her life had taken. She had chosen to help a stranger, and that choice would change everything. The stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, casting a soft light over the prairie. The wounded man rested quietly on the blanket, breathing more steadily than the previous night. She sat nearby, keeping watch, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She knew that tomorrow could bring danger, but she also knew that she had done the right thing. And sometimes she thought doing the right thing was worth any risk. The night was long, but it was peaceful. The rancher and the wounded man slept in shifts, watching over each other. Outside, the prairie was quiet, but the sense of anticipation hung in the air like a whisper. They were both aware that their choices had consequences, but in that moment, there was only trust and hope. By the time dawn approached, the rancher had made her decision. No matter who came, no matter what challenges arose, she would stand by the man she had helped. Her courage was no longer just for herself. It was for another life, and for the principle that kindness and humanity could exist even in the harshest of worlds. And so, as the first light of morning painted the fields in gold, the rancher and the wounded man waited, ready to face whatever the new day would bring. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and the wide-open prairie. The rancher had been awake for hours, her mind alert to every sound. She had learned to trust her instincts, and that morning, her heart told her something was different. Something was coming. She glanced toward the horizon, and far in the distance, she saw dust rising. It moved steadily, as if a group of people were advancing along the dirt road. Her pulse quickened. She knew deep down who it might be. The wounded man, Running Hawk, had spoken the day before about his people, his Comanche band, and now, perhaps, they had found him. But she could not be certain. She quickly moved inside the cabin and gently shook him awake.
"They're coming," she said quietly. He opened his eyes, alert instantly.
He sat up slowly, wincing slightly as his body protested. My people, he said, his voice low but steady. Strong, many. No, hurt you, he added, trying to reassure her. She nodded, though worry filled her chest. I hope so, she whispered. She moved quickly, setting the table and preparing the cabin as best she could. She pushed heavy furniture against the doors and windows just in case. But she also knew that violence would solve nothing here. Whatever happened, she had to be calm, honest, and ready to show that her intentions were good. Minutes felt like hours as the sound of distant hoofbeats grew louder. Then she heard voices speaking in a language she did not understand. Her ears caught the rhythm and tones, and she realized that it was the language of the Comanche. She looked at Running Hawk, whose expression was a mix of relief and nervousness. He rose slowly to his feet, steadying himself. They trust me, he said softly, almost to himself. I tell them! The rancher nodded, encouraging him with a gentle smile. Do what you must, she said. I will follow your lead. A small group of warriors approached the cabin, moving with purpose but not aggression. They were cautious, watching every movement and speaking quietly among themselves. The rancher stepped outside, keeping her hands visible and her posture calm. She had never faced such a group before, and though fear tightened her chest, she reminded herself that they were here because of him, and he had trusted her. Running Hawk stepped forward, greeting them in his language. The warriors paused, their eyes scanning the cabin and then turning to the rancher. For a moment, there was silence, and the rancher felt the weight of every gaze. She had prepared herself for anger, for accusations, even for violence, but none came. Instead, there was curiosity, a careful watchfulness. One of the warriors, taller than the others, with feathers in his hair and a calm but commanding presence, stepped closer. Running Hawk spoke quickly to him, pointing at the rancher and then at his injuries. Slowly, the leader turned toward her, and she realized that this was the moment that would decide everything. She took a deep breath and spoke in the few words of English she had practiced for this moment. I helped him, she said clearly. I gave food, water, care. No harm. The leader's gaze was steady. He studied her, and for a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then he spoke to Running Hawk in their language. The young man nodded, then turned to her and said, They understand. You saved life. Brave! Relief washed over her, but she kept her expression calm. Thank you, she said softly. I only did what was right. The warrior slowly relaxed, and the tension in the air began to ease. They entered the cabin carefully, their eyes taking in the small space, the simple furniture, and the wounded man now sitting more upright. There was a sense of respect in their movements, as if they were acknowledging the honesty and courage it took to care for one of their own. Over the next hour, the rancher listened as the warriors spoke to Running Hawk. She did not understand their words, but she watched their gestures, their expressions, and she realized they were discussing her actions. Running Hawk translated small pieces for her, explaining that they were not angry. In fact, they were grateful. Her care had saved one of their lives, and in their eyes that was something to honor. As the day progressed, the rancher learned more about their culture and values. They spoke of loyalty, of the bonds that tied their people together, and of the dangers they faced from those who did not understand their way of life. She realized that the world was far more complex than she had imagined. The same men who had once been labeled as enemies now showed her respect and appreciation. It was a lesson she would never forget. Running Hawk grew stronger under her care, and the presence of his people seemed to energize him. He moved with more confidence, speaking quietly to them, and she could see the relief in his eyes. He had been worried for them just as much as she had worried for him. Now there was a fragile harmony in the cabin. The warriors stayed for several hours, ensuring that Running Hawk was stable and that the rancher was unharmed. They asked questions, some translated through gestures, about her life on the ranch, her family, and how she had come to be alone. She answered honestly, feeling a strange sense of connection despite the differences in their worlds. It was a shared understanding of hardship, survival, and courage. By late afternoon, the leader spoke directly to her, a translator by Running Hawk. "You saved life. You Braveheart. You good," he said. The words were simple, but the meaning was profound. She nodded, feeling warmth in her chest. Gratitude and respect had crossed a vast cultural divide, and she realized the power of kindness and honesty. Before leaving, the warriors made gestures that she did not fully understand, leaving small gifts behind. Dried meat, handcrafted tools, and a piece of cloth decorated with their symbols. It was a sign of respect and a promise that she would not be harmed. She thanked them, bowing slightly, and felt a sense of relief and awe. When the last of the warriors disappeared into the distance, she and Running Hawk sat together in the quiet cabin. Neither spoke for a long time, simply absorbing what had happened. The air felt lighter now, as if the tension had been lifted by the acknowledgement of her actions. "You safe," Running Hawk said finally, a small smile on his face.
"Yes," she replied, her own smile mirroring his. "Thanks to you, too."
"You were brave to trust me." He nodded, understanding the truth in her words. They had faced fear together, relied on each other, and survived a day that could have ended in tragedy. The bond they had formed was stronger now, built not just on necessity but on mutual respect and humanity. As evening approached, the rancher tended the small garden outside, reflecting on the lessons of the day. Fear and courage, danger and kindness, they were all part of life on the frontier. She realized that bravery was not just in facing physical threats, but in standing by one's principles even when the world might judge you. She had learned that truth could bridge even the widest divides between people. Night fell over the ranch, calm and peaceful, yet the memory of the warrior's presence lingered. She understood that the world was full of unexpected connections and that her life had changed in a way she could never have imagined. The wounded man, now resting more comfortably, seemed at peace for the first time since he had arrived. The rancher knew that tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But for now, there was relief, gratitude, and a quiet joy in knowing that courage and kindness could create understanding between strangers from entirely different worlds. They had survived fear together, and that was a victory in itself. She closed the cabin door gently, sitting by the fire as the last light of day faded. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond the horizon, beautiful and dangerous, just as it had always been. But inside the cabin there was warmth, safety, and the knowledge that a single act of bravery could ripple far beyond its immediate impact. And so, the day ended with quiet reflection, a sense of connection, and the deep understanding that sometimes doing the right thing meant facing fear head-on and trusting that humanity could be found even in the harshest of places. The morning sun rose gently over the prairie, painting the fields with a warm golden glow. For the rancher, it was a quiet moment of reflection. The events of the previous day played in her mind again and again, and she still could hardly believe what had happened. A group of Comanche warriors had come to her doorstep, expecting danger, yet instead they had found trust, honesty, and kindness. The bond she had formed with Running Hawk and his people was something she had never imagined possible. She stepped outside the cabin, breathing in the crisp air. The wounded man, now sitting comfortably on a blanket, watched her with a smile that carried relief and gratitude. He moved with more strength now, his injuries healing well thanks to her care. For a brief moment, they simply sat in silence, listening to the wind rustle the tall grass and the distant calls of birds. It was a peaceful morning, one that felt almost unreal after the tension and fear of the past 2 days. The rancher knew, however, that life on the frontier was never truly calm for long. Rumors and stories traveled fast, and while the Comanche had left in peace, the townspeople might not understand the truth of what had happened. She had to be prepared for questions, whispers, or even suspicion. Yet she also knew that fear would not guide her actions. She had learned that courage was about standing by one's principles, even when others might doubt or judge. Running Hawk stood slowly, testing his strength. "Better," he said simply, his voice firm yet gentle.
You strong.
"Brave. Bank again." She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "You helped me too," she said softly. "I couldn't have done it without your trust." For a while they worked together around the cabin, tending to animals, checking the fences, and preparing food. The routine was comforting, a return to the rhythm of everyday life. But it was different now. The rancher noticed a new energy in Running Hawk, a confidence that had not been there before. He moved with purpose, carrying water, tending to the chickens, and even helping with small repairs around the cabin. Watching him, she realized that the experience had changed both of them. They had survived fear together, and that bond would not easily fade. By mid-morning, she decided to venture into the garden, picking fresh vegetables and herbs for their meal. As she worked, she reflected on what had happened with the Comanche warriors. Their actions had surprised her, not because they were dangerous, but because they had shown her respect and understanding. In their eyes, she had done something honorable, and that recognition had crossed a vast cultural divide. It was a lesson she would carry with her forever, that kindness and courage could bridge even the widest gaps between people. Later, Running Hawk helped her carry a basket of vegetables back into the cabin. He paused at the doorway, looking out across the prairie. "They safe," he said quietly, referring to his people. "You safe too?" She nodded, feeling a sense of relief. "Yes," she said. "Thanks to you." They prepared a simple meal together, sharing bread, vegetables, and some dried meat the warriors had left behind. It was a quiet meal, but it felt meaningful. Each bite reminded them of survival, trust, and the importance of caring for one another. As they ate, the rancher spoke softly about her life, her parents, and how she had come to live alone on the ranch. Running Hawk listened intently, nodding and asking questions with curiosity and respect. In the afternoon, the rancher decided to repair the fence along the edge of the property. Running Hawk joined her, carrying tools and helping with the work he could manage despite his injuries. They worked side by side, laughing occasionally at small mistakes and sharing stories of their past experiences. It was a simple task, but it felt symbolic. A repair of fences, not just in the land, but in trust between two very different worlds. As the day wore on, the rancher noticed movement in the distance. At first, her heart tightened, thinking it might be travelers or townspeople suspicious of the Comanche's visit. But as the figures came closer, she realized they were neighbors, approaching with friendly faces and cautious steps. Word had spread about her courage, but instead of judgment, she found curiosity and admiration. They had heard of her bravery in helping Running Hawk, and now they had come to see for themselves. The rancher greeted them warmly, explaining simply what had happened. She spoke of her decision to help a wounded man, of the trust she had earned, and of the respect shown by his people. The neighbors listened intently, some nodding in understanding, others wide-eyed at the courage it had taken. Slowly, they began to see that bravery was not always about fighting. It could be about compassion, honesty, and the courage to do what was right. By evening, the prairie was bathed in golden light, the sky painted with streaks of pink and orange. The rancher and Running Hawk sat outside the cabin, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The events of the past days had changed them both, and they knew life would never be the same. But they also knew that they had survived, learned, and grown stronger because of it. "You happy?" Running Hawk asked quietly, looking at her. She nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. "Yes," she said, "because I did what I believed was right. And because I see that kindness, it matters." He smiled faintly, his gaze distant but calm. "Yes, matters," he agreed. The night settled over the ranch, bringing quiet and calm. The stars emerged one by one, twinkling across the vast sky, a reminder of the infinite world beyond the prairie. Inside the cabin, they prepared for sleep, knowing the ranch would face challenges in the future, but also knowing that courage, trust, and compassion could guide them through anything. The rancher reflected on the journey that had begun just days ago with a chance encounter. She had faced fear, risk, and uncertainty, but she had also experienced connection, gratitude, and respect across worlds that seemed so different. The lesson was clear. True bravery was not in confrontation or violence, but in standing for what was right, even when it was dangerous. Running Hawk, now rested and stronger, settled on the blanket, looking at her with quiet admiration. They shared a moment of understanding without words, a bond that would last far beyond this encounter, shaped by shared experiences, trust, and courage. In the quiet hours before dawn, the rancher walked outside one last time, gazing at the endless prairie. The wind brushed against her face, carrying with it the scent of grass, earth, and freedom. She thought of the Comanche warriors, of Running Hawk, and of the fragile connections that had grown into something powerful. She knew that life would continue with its challenges, but she also knew that the choices she had made had created a legacy of courage and compassion. And so, the story ends not with conflict, but with understanding. Two lives, once strangers from different worlds, had crossed paths and changed each other. The rancher had learned that empathy and bravery could survive even in a world filled with fear. And Running Hawk had found safety, care, and respect in a place he had never expected. The prairie remained vast and wild, but inside that small cabin there was warmth, trust, and the quiet certainty that doing what is right can ripple far beyond what anyone can see. The stars shone brightly overhead as the rancher closed her eyes, feeling a deep peace she had not known for years. She had faced danger, chosen compassion, and survived. The prairie would continue to stretch endlessly, full of beauty and challenge, but she now knew that courage and kindness could shape even the harshest of worlds. And with that, she drifted to sleep, ready to face whatever the new day would bring, strengthened by the lessons of humanity, bravery, and trust.